Okay, I have made it to the cemetery, Shannon Rose Hill Cemetery, where Lee Harvey Oswald is buried. And it was quite a little drive out here. I had to make it all the way to Fort Worth. So I saved this for one of my later trips. I'm going to turn the video around. As you can see, not much to see here. Looks like a red granite grave marker. Next to it is another red granite grave marker. I'll tell the story of Nick Beef, along with the story of this grave, how it ended up here at this particular cemetery. And of course, you see there is wide open space next to Oswald. It's just this Nick Beef grave marker next to it, and more wide open space in front. There are grave markers in front of Oswald. First, Miller Funeral Home. It's an interesting story. Oswald, in the aftermath of the assassination, obviously that's a pretty notorious name, and trying to find a funeral home that would handle the remains of Oswald and or a graveyard was tricky. Anyway, in Fort Worth, a Miller Funeral Home, which no longer exists, which is why I couldn't go to its location, handled the remains, and the remains were handled by Paul Grudy. Paul Grudy tells the story how on the 24th, when they got the body, this is after he was declared dead at Parkland Hospital after having been killed by Jack Ruby, he was preparing the body for burial, and he had to, obviously it had gone through an autopsy, so you got to prepare the body for funeral, clean it, dress it, etc., etc. He had just finished, and he got a knock on the back door in the funeral home, and he went to the door, and it was several FBI agents, and one of them was carrying a rifle. He remembered that. And then another one was carrying what looked like a medical bag. It was a fingerprinting kit is what it was. And they had come to inspect the body, they said, of Lee Harvey Oswald. And when he asked about the gun, he said, well, he was told it was just merely for comparison purposes. That was a direct quote. And so he pointed them in the direction of the body, and then they asked him to leave. So he went to the front of the funeral home and left them behind with the body. When they left, he returned and found that the body, which had been finished, prepared for burial, was now all dirty again. In fact, there was what appeared to be an oily residue all over Oswald's hands, and it got on the cuffs of his shirt and his jacket he was wearing. And so Grudy was a little perturbed, frustrated. He had to do his work all over again. He had to take the jacket off, the shirt off, re-clean Oswald's hands, wrists, redress him, and prepare him for burial again. The interesting thing is the FBI had come out with a memo 24 hours after the assassination, saying that they had examined the, quote, Oswald rifle. They had taken it apart. This is a memo by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, saying they had examined the inner parts of the rifle, the stock, every part of the rifle that they could take apart, disassemble, put it back together. They frantically looking for fingerprints, couldn't find any. No palm prints, no fingerprints, nothing. There were no prints to be developed on the Oswald rifle. Those are the exact words of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. That was the one missing piece. They had the so-called Oswald rifle, but they just didn't have any prints on it, and they wanted those prints. So that was on the that was a memo written 24 hours after Oswald was killed, or Kennedy was killed, and then the next day Oswald was killed. And at the end of that day, the FBI shows up at Miller's funeral home and tells Grudy to disappear, and they go in with a rifle and with a fingerprinting kit, and they dirty up his hands and his wrists and his jacket and his shirt, so much so that Grudy has to redress him, re-clean him, etc. And sure enough, the very next day, the FBI announces to the world that they have found a palm print on the Oswald rifle. You just can't make this stuff up. So according to Paul Grudy, the FBI clearly manufactured evidence. They brought that gun in, which they had with them, and they put it on Oswald's dead hand, as evidenced by all the fingerprint oil that was left behind, the residue on his hands, and they put that print on the gun, and then they left. They had no reason to be there. Certainly no reason to bring a gun or a fingerprinting kit. They knew who he was. They knew who the dead body was. Every step of the way after he was shot, he was under armed guard. From the time he was at Trauma Room 1 at Parkland Hospital, declared dead, transported to Miller Funeral Home, under armed guard, up to and including his gravesite service, which the only people in attendance, other than Oswald's family, were FBI agents and some reporters. So there wasn't any mystery about who he was. There's no reason to have a fingerprinting kit. There's certainly no reason to have the gun. Certainly no reason to put fingerprint oil all over his hands, unless they were going to put that gun on his hand after having applied the fingerprint material oil, so that they could go and announce to the world they had a fingerprint or a palm print. So we've been talking about manufactured bullshit. Here's some more of that. And all the doppelgangers and things. Well, this is how they got the palm print, according to Paul Grudy. And I suppose, people say, well, maybe Paul Grudy made it up. Why? What purpose would that serve? I don't get it. So then the matter becomes, okay, now we got to find a place to bury him. Marguerite, Oswald's mom, had requested for her son to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. She said her son was a CIA agent. He'd served his country. He'd done everything his country had asked him to do. He was a hero. That's a mom speaking. And of course, Arlington was not ever going to accept Lee Harvey Oswald. So his final resting place instead becomes Shannon Rose Hill Cemetery in Fort Worth, Texas. And that was a struggle because most of the cemeteries didn't want him. So they had to search and search. They finally found one that would accept him. And the officials didn't waste any time putting him in the ground. You figure on November 22nd, JFK was shot. November 20, and he was arrested, Oswald. November 23rd, at 1:50 p.m. is when Oswald was arrested for, actually it was November 22nd at 1:50 p.m. Oswald was arrested for killing President Kennedy. November 24th, he himself was killed by Jack Ruby at 11:21 a.m. in the police garage. And then on November 25th at 4:30 p.m., 4:28 p.m. exactly, Oswald is buried here beneath this grave marker. By the way, John F. Kennedy was buried the same day. But unlike Oswald, he was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. As I said, no cemetery in Dallas would claim him. That's why they end up clear out here in Fort Worth. After word leaked that his body had been transferred to Miller's funeral home in Fort Worth, a crowd gathered outside. And so officials, afraid that the violence was going to break out, secretly arranged for Oswald's burial in Shannon Rose Hill Cemetery. To avoid publicity, they used a pseudonym so that grave diggers wouldn't spill the beans who they were digging a grave for. They had a hard time finding, let me get a little closer here, finding pallbearers due to the extreme secrecy surrounding the funeral. The only people present besides his immediate family were federal agents, police, and some reporters. And so that is why reporters, members of the press, wound up carrying Lee Harvey Oswald's coffin to his burial plot. A minister from the Fort Worth Council of Churches named Lewis Saunders was another last-minute addition. Reverend Sanders said he had no more than 20 seconds to prepare his eulogy, so it was very last second. And as you can see, there's nothing fancy about his headstone. His grave is marked by a small rectangular slab flush to the ground. It's got no dates on it, no other info, not even his full name. It just simply reads Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, whom I already identified as Marguerite, is buried in an unmarked grave next to her son. So that would be over here to the left, as you can see. I'm going to pan out a little bit here so you can see there's Nick Sweat, there's Oswald, and then in an unmarked grave, Marguerite is buried next to him. So let's talk about this Nick Sweat, or Nick Beef actually. This grave appeared in 1997, and it's exactly the same size, exactly the same shape, and it doesn't have any information either. It just says Nick Beef. You know, just for comparison purposes, the grave right in the back here, look at all the information. You got born on date, the day Jesse May Davenport died, a little message in God's loving care. Next to you have Betty Jean Hayes again. That's okay, that person hasn't died yet. There's a little Bible verse notation there. Here you have Ruby Hayes, October 30, 1910, September 2, 2000, beloved wife and mother. This is, that's pretty standard, right? And then all of a sudden you have this Oswald grave with nothing other than the name, which you can almost understand why that happened, because of the notoriety of the person. But then what about this guy? And you have the same deal, and it's just it was a mystery. Just the name, Nick Beef. In 2013, the New York Times decided to get to the bottom of this Nick Beef gravestone, grave marker. They tracked down a Nick and found the mysterious Nick Beef, who it turns out was still alive, actually alive and well. This is in 2013. And when they interviewed the guy, they found out that Nick Beef was actually an alter ego of a man named Patrick Abedin, who described himself as a writer and a, quote, non-performing performance artist. I don't know what the hell that is. According to Mr. Abedin, he grew up in Texas. He was in elementary school when Kennedy was shot. He had vivid memories of seeing the president and first lady when they arrived at the airport in '63. And he said he and his mom, when he was a kid, would often come out and visit Oswald's grave. In '75, Abedin heard that the plot beside Oswald's was unclaimed, so he came by the cemetery and he bought it. And then he moved to New York. He got married. He had kids. He found work as a humor writer and made a life for himself there. When Mr. Abedin's mom passed away in '96, he returned to Texas and set about to purchase the memorial. And when he was doing that, on a whim, he purchased this grave marker for himself with his alter ego marked on it, Nick Beef. Not wanting to expose his kids to any inquiries, he had the little stone inscribed with his pen name, Nick Beef, instead of his given name. And when the interviewer asked him why he purchased the plot, remember he purchased the plot in 75, and in 96 he purchased the grave marker. When the interviewer asked him why he purchased the plot and later the marker, Aberdeen didn't really know himself. He was kind of cryptic about it. He said in both cases they were impulse buys. And he had difficulty verbalizing why he did it, but he said, I don't plan to be buried there. I plan to be cremated. And so this means that to the left of Lee Harvey Oswald, here in this unmarked area, is an unmarked grave of his mom, and to the right of Oswald's grave is, with nobody in it, with no grave, is a performance artist's alter ego. And it'll permanently be there, I guess, marking this. I guess this Patrick Aberdeen, in a kind of twisted sort of way, wanted the space next to somebody famous and somebody that he had personal connection with when he was young, growing up, coming out visiting this grave marker with his mom. So I'm sure a psychiatrist could do a real good case study on Nick Beef and Patrick Aberdeen as to why he would want to be buried here or even have any association with Oswald, but that's above my pay grade. But anyway, that's the story of how Nick Beef ends up next to Oswald. And so if you get on Google Images, or there's even video footage of the funeral, you know, they recorded it, and I think the whatever you call the message, or whatever you want to call it, by the preacher lasted less than a minute. It was just a quick slam bam, thank you ma'am kind of a service. And again, the only people in attendance were people that were being paid to be here, other than the family. And so this is the sad end of Lee Harvey Oswald, who at the time was the most notorious man in the world, and pretty much assumed by most everybody that he was the assassin of JFK and the killer of J.D. Tippit, whom we now know didn't even fire a shot on that day. Even the paraffin test, which the FBI hid from everybody, confirmed he had not fired a rifle that day. So we know, as a matter of fact, documented fact, that he could not have fired a rifle to kill JFK that day. And because of the timing issues, we know there's no way he could have been at 10th and Patton and killed J.D. Tippit. So this man is falsely accused. He was a CIA asset, and he was following orders every step of the way. Everything he did, from the time he was in the U.S. Marine Corps and he signed up to be in the CIA, he took the Russian language training, and even when he got out of the Marines and went to Russia, that was a mission. He was a fake defector. When he came back, we've just learned that he came back within 10 days of ZR rifle being started, and he was the American asset that was being set up from the get-go to take the fall, to be the patsy, to be the American asset who was turned by the Russian intelligence and ordered about by the Russian intelligence, which is why they came up with the Mexico City story that he met with Kostakov right before the assassination. He was trying to get travel visas so he could run away to Cuba or Russia again afterwards. It was all set up. All the doppelgangers, they were all setups. All of the sightings and the curtain rod story, it was all bullshit. The Mexico City story was bullshit. Everything was bullshit. Everything we've come to learn. You still open a history book to this day. I know it's always been frustrating to me. I've taught history, high school history, for 30 years. And every history book still says the same thing. First of all, there's very little said about the JFK assassination other than that on November 22nd, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository, killing the president and wounding Governor John Connally. In the aftermath, he kills the cop, and he was caught. I mean, that's what it says, still to this day. And, it's all bullshit. Every last bit of it. There was a little controversy shortly after, I don't remember the year, but there were some people who suspected that Oswald's body was not in this tomb and that somebody else was buried here. So they actually dug it up to check and do all the testing and everything, and they found out it was Oswald's body. And so they reinterred the body under this grave again. But this is the final resting place of Lee Harvey Oswald, whom I consider to be the most misunderstood and lied about human this side of Jesus Christ himself, I suppose. He died relatively young, very young actually. But what a life! And all the stereotypes about how he's dumb, high school dropout, he was crazy, lone nut. None of it's true. You don't get recruited into the CIA if you're any of those things. You don't get trained in Russian language. They're not going to invest any of that if you're lone nut, if you're stupid, if you're dumb. All of that, none of that was true. He was actually very smart, very intelligent, as evidenced by the fact that he mastered the Russian language and carried out the fake defector mission that he was sent to Russia to do. It takes a lot of stones to stand up to the KGB the way he did over there. He was trained. He took the training well, and when he was on the field, or in the field, he handled his business. And for a period of time had the KGB fooled. KGB eventually figured it out. They realized if this guy was a real defector, he would never be let to go back to the United States in the middle of the Cold War after renouncing his American citizenship, after giving military secrets to the Russians. They charged him with treason for sure, but none of that happened. He was brought back to America because he was an American asset, and that's when the KGB realized just who he was. And I could go on and on. I really felt compelled to come out to this gravesite. I just feel like better, probably more symbolically than anything else, this gravestone represents a lie that the American government told the American people. And because they got away with it, they've been lying to us ever since. And so symbolically, this name and this headstone and all the things surrounding or attached to it, the meaning is so important. We've not been the same country since this weekend in 1963. Okay, that's the Lee Oswald site here in Rose Hill Cemetery. And just to kind of, I'm gonna pan out here and just show you kind of from where I'm standing. You can see these stones on this particular section, which is section 17, are all flush with the ground. There are no headstones above the ground. And same thing across the way there, behind that huge mausoleum. But then you look across, and it's different. So I would imagine that they have different sections for different kinds of people. Or maybe it's cost, I don't know. But it's an old cemetery. There's no markings anywhere. I found this, there's, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of graves here. It's a pretty big cemetery. It goes way over the crust over the side of that hill over there. It goes way back. I found this marker by going online, and somebody had been kind enough to indicate where it was by saying it was 30 feet to the right of that tree, which they said was 30 feet to the right of that mausoleum, marked Shannon. So I searched and searched until I found that mausoleum, Shannon, and I found that tree. And then I walked 30 feet to the right, and there he was. And there's Nick Beef. Now use that as a trivia question. Anybody who comes into your life and brags about how much history they know, ask them who Nick Beef is. All right, on to the next site.